Welcome to the podcast. I'm Angela Bobier, and this is Life in the Talbot Settlement, brought to you by Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. In this series, we will do our best to give you a full appreciation of the history of Western Elgin County in southwestern Ontario, from First Nations to the early settlers to the 1950s. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge funding from Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Happy New Year! Welcome to the 49th episode of our podcast, Life in the Talbot Settlement. Today we'll be talking about some New Year's traditions such as wassailing and mummering. And before we begin, I want to acknowledge funding from Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. If you'd like to sponsor one of our podcasts, please get in touch at info@backuspagehouse.ca. In the 21st century, most people gather around New Year's Eve to have a party, perhaps drink a little, and watch their region's ball drop at midnight, marking the start of the new year. But what other traditions are there? What would the settlers of Upper Canada have done to celebrate the coming year? Today, I'll be talking about the history of wassailing and mummering, both customs that originated in Europe that made their way over to Upper Canada. Wassailing is an ancient tradition that stems from pagan times. The Anglo-Saxon tradition dictated that at the beginning of each year, the lord of the manor would greet the crowds with the toast, "Was hael," which means be well or be in good health. The followers would then reply to the Lord, "Drink hael," translating to drink well. And so the New Year celebration would commence and drinks would be shared. The saying, "Was hael," spelt W-A-E-S-H-A-E-L, later turned into what we call wassail, and adaptations of the tradition formed, centered around singing and drinking. Before the Gregorian calendar messed things up in 1752, the traditional date of wassailing was the 17th of January. Now the custom commonly takes place on January 5th, also known as the 12th night, and coincidentally, the same date that I'm recording this episode for you. There are two forms of wassailing, house wassailing and orchard wassailing. The former involves a group of revelers, often farmers, farm workers, and villagers, marching from one orchard to the next, creating a noisy procession as they bang pots and pans, sing, shout, and fire shotguns. This process was to waken the sleeping tree spirits and ward off any evil lurking in the branches. The wassailers would gather around the biggest trees and place wassail-soaked toast into its branches, accompanied by a song. The purpose of this practice was to give gifts to the tree spirits to ensure a bountiful crop. This custom is still practiced today and is particularly popular in the cider-producing areas of England as well as the east coast of Canada. I bet that birds and wildlife enjoyed nibbling on the soaked toast that were in those trees too. Now the second form is house wassailing, in which merrymakers go house to house, singing songs, carrying a wassail bowl, and spreading good wishes. In the Middle Ages, villagers would approach the lord of the manor and ask for money and food in exchange for blessings and song. If the lord felt charitable, he would demonstrate goodwill to those who served him. The wassailing bowl was a wooden bowl or cup originally made of lignum vitae, one of the hardest commercial woods of England in the 17th century. This type of wood was perfect for holding hot liquids. However, the bowl was also commonly ceramic and fitted with many handles surrounding the vessel. The wassail drink itself generally consisted of warmed ale, wine, or cider blended with spices, honey, apples, and perhaps eggs. The drink was frequently referred to as lamb's wool because the top froth-like layer from the apples resembled wool. The poem Winter by William Shakespeare describes the sound of crab apples being thrown in the hot wassail drink. When icicles hang by the wall, and Dick the shepherd blows his nail, and Tom bears logs into the hall, and milk comes frozen home in pail. When blood is nipped and ways be foul, then nightly sings the staring owl, to wit, to who, a merry note, while greasy Joan doth keel the pot. When all aloud the wind doth blow, and coughing drowns the parson's saw, and birds sit brooding in the snow, and Marian's nose looks red and raw, when roasted crabs hiss in the bowl, then nightly sings the staring owl, to wit, to a merry note, while greasy Joan doth keel the pot. Thank you, William Shakespeare. The drink was served from the bowl and passed around from one person to the next. Over time, this tradition morphed into what we know as caroling. Some traditional carols, like We Wish You a Merry Christmas, are based off wassailing. For instance, take the lines, quote, "Now give us some figgy pudding," end quote, or, quote, "We won't go until we've got some," end quote, refers to wassailers begging for food. Marie Lloyd is another traditional folk adaptation of the house wassailing custom. This version was largely practiced in Wales during the Victorian era. There has been much speculation surrounding how the name Mary Lloyd came about, though it is thought to be influenced by Celtic and British mythology. So what is Mary Lloyd? Well, Mary Lloyd is a horse's skull, with lights as eyes, attached to a pole. The mane is made of colorful streamers, ivy or holly, and a white cloak is fixed to hide the person who controls the character underneath. The character of Marie is one of mischief, often stealing objects and chasing people around. The makeshift horse is accompanied by villagers, an oster, a lady, and a jester. Once Marie and the party have reached a house, they sing Welsh songs, wassails, and more traditionally, a ritual called punca. This ritual involves an exchange of rude rhymes with the person who answers the door. If entry is granted into the house, it is believed that good luck will come in the new year upon those who let Marie in. The first written record of Marie Lloyd was in 1800 in the book called A Tour Through Part of North Wales by J. Evans. The origins are unknown, but the custom resembles many other hooded animal traditions of Britain. For example, the Old Tup in Derbyshire involved a group of poor people disguised in a makeshift horse costume. The villagers would go door to door trying to find money and food in the harsh depths of winter. Marie Lloyd almost ended in the 19th century after the custom faced criticism from Welsh Methodists and Christian nonconformists. Thankfully, practices remained alive, and Marie is still seen at night in cold, wintry villages of Wales. The next pre-Christian tradition we will be talking about is mummering. Mummering is very similar to wassailing in the respect that it involves dressed-up villagers going door-to-door singing. The custom is believed to date back to Roman times when dressing up for parties became widely popular. Originally, mummering involved men and women swapping clothing and putting on masks, after which mummers would go door-to-door singing, dancing, and asking for food and drink in song. During the time of King Henry VIII of England, mummering shifted from jovial reaction to a means for deceitful begging and crime committing. King Henry VIII enforced a law prohibiting mummers from wearing masks. Those who disobeyed faced 3 months in jail. Practices of mummering varied depending on the region and time period. In regions like Durham, Yorkshire, and Devon in England, a sword dance was incorporated into the mummering custom. Not only did the practices and rituals of mummering vary depending on region, but the name did too. In Scotland, it is known as guising. It's called corning in Kent and mumping in Warwickshire. Today, mummering is still practiced in parts of the UK and the east coast of Canada, though the traditions have been altered. In Newfoundland, people are outfitted with their undergarments over top of their outerwear, and homemade masks are used to disguise their identity. Once dressed, mummers go to their neighbors' doors unannounced and ask, "Any mummers load in?" A fun game is made for guessing the identity of those dressed up, and shortly after, dancing and drinking commence. Another adaptation of mummering Newfoundlanders have created is an ugly stick. These sticks are essentially a pole with bottle caps attached to create a jingling sound, a rubber boot nailed to the bottom, and a tin can with a mop to represent a face. Ugly sticks are widely used by mummers to create music while dancing. However, it is not required to participate in mummering, rather a fun little extra. This version of mummering has been practiced in Newfoundland for around 200 years. Today, mummering is banned in some regions of the world because it is seen as begging. However, modern house wassailing is essentially begging as well, just without the disguise. So next time you sing Christmas carols, pay attention to the lyrics and you just might find some parallels to the traditions of wassailing and mummering. I do apologize if I pronounced any of the words incorrectly, especially the ones that were Welsh. Thank you for listening to this week's episode on traditional New Year's customs, and we wish everyone Was Hail for 2023. Please share the podcast with your friends and follow us on all social media platforms at Backus-Page House. The Backus-Page House Museum and Tyrconnell Heritage Society acknowledges the land we are on today as the traditional territory of First Nations people. As settlers at a settler-focused museum, we value both the significant historical and contemporary contributions of all Original peoples and ask how we can be supportive in Indigenous cultural renewal. Life in the Talbot Settlement is a production of Tyrconnell Heritage Society, operators of Backus-Page House Museum. Your host has been Angela Bobier, music provided by Jack Witmer, and thanks to our producer, Katlyn Reintsma. To make a charitable donation, become a Tyrconnell Heritage Society member, and to contact the Backus-Page House Museum, please visit our website, www.backuspagehouse.ca. Thank you again for listening.